Well, goodness me, haven't we had a busy couple of days? And believe it or not, Arsenal have a game tomorrow. Yes, football does exist beyond the change of sporting directors. This is the Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. I hope you've had a fantastic start to your week. It's already Tuesday. I say it's already Tuesday. It genuinely feels like Friday and Tuesdays are, as always, the worst day of the week. But I can't help but think that it's felt such a long week already. So much happened yesterday. What a chaotic day. I still have slides of kind of, what I think Arsenal can do to solve a lot of their problems. Just kind of, it was there. That was ready. That was the show for Monday that I was going to do. And then 5 to 8 in the morning, Sammy Mockbell drops that absolute scoop, a huge scoop. Brilliant piece of journalistic work by Sammy to get that story on Edu that has now completely dominated, completely taken over all of the discussion. And yesterday we did two shows. We obviously did the morning 8 a.m. show, which turned into a 2 hour 45 minutes, I think it was, phone-in show. If you haven't yet watched that, listen to it. It is available on audio platforms as well. A variety of opinions, a variety of different discussions, some ones we agreed, some ones we didn't agree, and I thought it was a really good kind of discussion as well. So yeah, loads going on. Make sure if you haven't done so already, to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are indeed new around here, with those notifications turned on, so you never miss a show. And good morning to those joining us live in the chat box: Blackshine, Barry, Rich, Naz, Amira, Stephen, Runs with Cows, Damien, Stevie, Trader Mike, Peekahoo, Louis, Franklin, Mark, Glenn, plenty of you guys and girls, as always. Thank you for tuning in. We're here every day, 8 a.m., same time, same place. So without further ado, we start with, of course, Edu Gaspar. Where else would we start? I did run through the statement that was released on the Arsenal website yesterday in our kind of afternoon reaction show to that resignation, just for the benefit of those that didn't see or watch or have read it yet, just to give you kind of a quick rundown. Edu said this was an incredibly hard decision to make. Arsenal have given me the opportunity to work with so many amazing people and the chance to be part of something so special in the club's history. It's been a special journey, and I thank Stan, Josh, and Tim and Lord Harris for the support they've given me, and I've loved working with so many great colleagues across our men's, women's, and academy teams, especially Mikel, who has become a great friend. Now it is time to pursue a different challenge. Arsenal will always remain in my heart, and I wish the club and its supporters only good things and all the very best. Josh Kroenke said, we respect Edu's decision and thank him for his immense contribution and dedication to drive the club forward. Everyone at the club wishes him well. We are also very fond of him and the energy that he has brought to everything and everyone. Change and evolution is part of our club, and we remain focused on our strategy and winning major trophies. Our succession plan will reflect this continued ambition. And is that last line, of course, that we find ourselves now looking ahead, looking to the who, to the what, the how, the why, the when of what happens next, and who will come into this role that Mikel Arteta is going to have what is understood to be quite a significant influence on deciding. I was listening yesterday to Clive and Sophie on the Highbury Squad, and I see Clive has joined us in the chat box as well. Good morning, my friend. I was listening kind of to the conversation around the who, and I absolutely agree with Clive that I think we need to go out and bring somebody in that is going to be holding people to account, that's going to be not allowing Arteta necessarily to take a huge kind of influence. I think we need people to have their jobs, have their roles, so that Arteta isn't stretched too thin like Arsene Wenger was. We need to bring in a profile that's going to be able to take the club forwards and do the things that Edu did really well and do the things that Edu didn't do well better. That's what we're obviously looking for. We know it wasn't perfect. We know that we can definitely improve upon what we had with Edu, even despite the fact that we had and obviously had so much positivity and benefits from having him as a sporting director. And it's a shame, I think, some of the discourse surrounding him, and I talked a lot about that on yesterday's show and in the morning, that it did feel like the work that's been done to put Arsenal into the position that they are now in has been utterly, entirely being ignored by a lot of people, and they're just kind of celebrating the fact that he's moved on. It's going to be very, very difficult to replace Edu. Names wise, I was talking yesterday that Simon Rolfes at the Bayer Leverkusen sporting director would certainly be someone that I would look at as a example of the type of person I think you need to look to. I think you need to look to a club that has obviously done some brilliant work in the market, that has progressed as a result of the recruitment that's gone on there. And Leverkusen, I think, are an excellent example of one of those teams that has been able to do that. But you can look at other sides in Italy, for instance, Napoli and Atalanta have always been two clubs that have looked to make some very decent signings over the years as well. We've seen Atalanta really rise up and bring through some very, very exciting players. And if you look into Bundesliga clubs again, Stuttgart have done a fantastic job there. Villarreal, of course, have continually done very well, despite the fact that overall they're not like. I know that Arsenal fans remember them getting to semi-finals of the Champions League, of course, with Arsenal, but still to maintain kind of that record, to be up where they are. Athletic you could look at as well, but their Basque-only policy, of course, makes that slightly different. But there's certainly a club that you could look to as well. And Real Sociedad, who Arsenal have already bought Mikel Marino from, of course, is another club that have done very well to get back into European contention and get some very good finishes in recent years. So there are clubs out there with individuals, of course, that have done very well for themselves. Mikel Arteta will face questions from the media this evening. He is set, and his squad are set to travel to Italy ahead of the game against Inter Milan on Wednesday evening, of course. So that means the press conference will take place, we expect, at San Siro, and Arteta will be facing questions from the media that happen to be in place tonight. So we will get the manager's reaction, how much he wants to give, how much he wants to talk about it. Of course, remains to be seen. We know he remains very coy on big topics, but considering this has now been officially announced by the club, it's not like anything is really in hiding. So there is going to be a lot of question marks facing Arteta on Edu, on transfers, on what it means for the future, on who he would like to bring in, on his work and influence in that decision. So we will hear from Mikel Arteta a little bit later on today. And we'll also hear some of his thoughts on the squads. Believe it or not, there is a world outside of Edu at the moment, and Arsenal's game against Inter Milan is a massive one. We will hope to get some team news updates on players like Martin Odegaard, of course, as well. And any other players. But he's also under a lot of scrutiny right now, is Arteta, without a win in the league in 3, having dropped 8 points of a possible 9 that could have been picked up in those 3 games. So Arteta is also facing a lot of heat right now. A win over Inter Milan would be a huge statement, a huge turnaround, and a good foundation to build back from. So hopefully that is what we witness tomorrow night. But we should get some insight into the team before that press conference, because as it is an away Champions League game, it does mean there is an open training session of which members of the media will be there. I've got another day off today. I've got 2 days off in a row. It's crazy, but I'm working the whole weekend this week. But it means I won't be attending for once. I want to be away open training sessions, but there will be people there to provide the insight, to provide the glimpse into who and who is not going to be available for Arsenal. And it'll be interesting to see, of course, whether or not Martin Odegaard is going to be one of those players that will be there and present and with the group, because there have been suggestions. Simon Collins of the Evening Standard reporting, of course, that he was kind of fighting to be in contention for this game. So let's wait and see if Odegaard is there. Him being there, of course, doesn't mean that he will play. It's just a very good sign. A decision is then usually made later in the day about whether or not the players travel with the squad for the next fixture. But fingers crossed, Odegaard will be in attendance. Well, let's go to part 2 and your questions right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of the show where Tom attempts not to cough constantly. I just can't shift it. For some reason, everyone leaves comments saying, Tom, you're always ill. I know. But I'm still feeling the effects of that from like a couple of weeks ago. It's that classic man flu case where your cough just persists, and I'm still trying to get over it. So do bear with me. I've got my trusty glass of water with me. But this is part 2 of the show where we will tackle your questions. So if you've got one over the next 10 to 15 minutes, use a capital Q, help them stand out, and I'll do my absolute best to tackle as many of them as feasibly possible. Rob says, if, as seems likely, Edu has another job offer, will Arsenal be in line for compensation, or can he just walk away from a contract? So these are different contracts to the types of contracts we see with managers and with players. They aren't done over like certain years. They're just full-time contracts. They're jobs. And so for that reason, I don't think we would see compensation. It's not that type of deal. To my understanding of the scenario, he has resigned. Arsenal have accepted his resignation. And so I do not expect to see, I don't expect to see any compensation coming Arsenal's way. It's just, I know that we've seen like Dan Ashworth, I think it was, going to Manchester United, and we've heard about compensation, but I think that was like, I think there were differences, and it might be because obviously this was a case where Arsenal accepted the resignation, whereas Newcastle didn't accept Dan Ashworth's resignation, so that caused problems, and there had to be kind of tribunals and financial mediation and stuff like that. But because it seems Arsenal have accepted Edu's resignation, obviously that changes things. Sadiq says, Edu has done a good job leaving the club in a better state, and if the right director of football is appointed, we can improve. And I think that's probably a good way. I mean, is Arsenal in a much better place like now compared to when Edu took over his role? It's night and day, and that tells you the type of job that Edu has done with the squad. Raj says, is there a chance that we are moving to a stats and scouting approach? I mean, we aren't moving to it. Arsenal have been in a stats and scouting approach for a while. Arsenal have always used analytics to look at players that they might be interested, that might fit their system. But it's a quantitative and qualitative process that takes into account different aspects, both numerical and more kind of behavioral and characteristics and traits of the person as well. So all of that is already part of Arsenal's scouting. Ashley says, do you think Sterling should start against Inter? Personally, he should start up a whole 90 minutes because he's cup tied against Chelsea. I also want him to start on the left and a front three with Havertz and Saka. Interesting one. We'll have a preview show later on today, of course, looking ahead to the game. Should Sterling start? I think we need to go strong, in this game. I think we need to make sure that we're playing with as full a strength side as feasibly possible. I know Chelsea is an important game at the weekend, but I'd be going as strong as we can. Get a win here. Arsenal's Champions League position looks very, very good. So, yeah, I think I'd still go relatively strong. I wouldn't be rotating too many players at all. Zeke says, how will Edu's departure affect our transfer business in January? It's difficult to know right now, Zeke, to be honest. Obviously, we don't know when Edu's official kind of end date is. We don't know when he's going to be leaving the club officially. Just because he's resigned or had it handed in his resignation doesn't mean he's worked through that period of notice. We don't know how long that notice period is. I imagine that there'll be like a lot of handover, and there'll be people, of course, still at the club that are doing that work. And also, you got to think about the fact that someone like Jason Ato, who is the kind of right-hand man to Edu, as far as we're aware, isn't leaving at the moment. There's been no real word on Jason's position at the club as well, whether he's going with Edu. So there are people, of course, in Edu's team that, to our understanding right now, will stay with Arsenal. So, yeah, just bear that in mind. Clive says, Edu is a personable character. I want the next guy to be likable in addition to being football focused. And the question, of course, is who is that? And the answer is the golden one. We don't know the answer right now. We don't know who that right person is. I know a lot of people like seeing the person involved in high up positions of the club, somebody that was with Arsenal in some capacity, either as a player or a former coach, or someone that has their attachment, their understanding of the club and its values. I don't personally think the sporting director needs to be a former Arsenal player. Arsenal have got a lot of influence of former players at the club. Mikel Arteta is the manager of the team. Per Mertesacker is the head of the academy. Adam Birchall, the head of the under-21s, is a former Arsenal youth player. You know, I don't think there is a desperation for there to be more of an Arsenal identity within the group. Of course, I'd love to see players like Santi Cazorla return to Arsenal, Dennis Bergkamp return to Arsenal. You know, I'd love to see these things happen in some capacity, but I want somebody to come in that's got expertise and experience of top level recruitment and working successfully with their relevant manager to generate significant improvements in squad building and has a very good and successful record. I'd value that far more over somebody that has an identity with Arsenal, because I think we've got all the identity we need. We've got all the identity we need in Arteta and Per Mertesacker and the other people behind the scenes. We don't need to make sure we go down this former Arsenal route. Clive says United had Darren Fletcher, and we'll see how that's gone down. Phil says I'm okay with Edu leaving, but I would have preferred he would have done what Chicky Bergerstein, the Man City guy, of course, did when he announced that he will leave at the end of the season instead of leaving so promptly. I agree. I think leaving at this moment is I'd criticize it personally of Edu, and I think that it would have been better for him to negotiate a scenario where he sees out the season at Arsenal, sees out the January windows, sees out a handing over process over a period of months. I think he has left Arsenal a little bit high and dry with this decision personally, and I am critical of it. So I think it could have been done much better. Ike again says the regression. No X Factor last season was Kai. I mean, we're 9 games into the season. Of course, we've had a dip, and the form's gone down. Of course, there are mitigating circumstances for that out of our control. There are things that are very much in our control, like the Newcastle game, that I simply could not forgive. But don't get me wrong, we are a long, long way from having discussions about the kind of managerial changes as well. Sophie says, if it was to be a top player, only one I can think of who comes to close to engaging is perhaps Gilberto Silva. I've been so very impressed with him through conversations on the tour. I don't really know too much of Gilberto Silva's work beyond, of course, what he's been doing recently on more of a social level. He's been part of a company called Striver, I think, and he's obviously been doing a lot of work with them about online social media presence. But I can't say that I know too much. In 2016, Gilberto joined Panathinaikos as a technical director. He left in December after 7 months in the role. He now serves as an ambassador for both Arsenal and FIFA. He was named as the 23rd FIFA Masterclass patron by the International Centre of Sports Studies in 2023 for his contribution to football. So he's not worked in that type of role since December of 2016. So while an impressive character, I don't think he's got the pedigree at the moment, it seems, to be able to take over that position. Halo says high-level sporting directors have now resigned from a lot of the best teams in the Premier League, and there must be a common ground for this. I think there's obviously emphasis on wages and pay and, those people being given jobs elsewhere for significantly more money. And Fiddy says, to be fair, Tom, I can't blame Edu if his mate is offering to pay him 3 times what he's making at Arsenal and not have to deal with all the pressure, sometimes toxic, from our fan base. It's sad, but I would have done the same thing. And people are different. I had someone leave a comment on yesterday's show saying, Tom, if someone offered you 3 times, to go and do a different job to what you're doing, would you take it? My honest answer is from my perspective, is no, I wouldn't. I value happiness and enjoyment over money. Now, it may be, of course, that Edu isn't happy in his role. I can only come from the perspective of that, but it's a different position for me. You can't just turn around to someone and say, would you leave your job for 3 times the amount of money? Because it depends what the job that you're being asked to do is. If it's a job that isn't going to make me happy, or I wouldn't switch personally, because I enjoy what I do. So it's difficult. Tyser says, John says in the chat, if you want loyalty, get a dog, as Robbie Keane, Roy Keane, of course, said the other day on Sky. Amira says, as Clive alluded to on the show, surely it's more beneficial if recruited individuals from the men's, women's, and academy recruitment, respectively. One club, but Edu overlooking all three seems like a lot. I definitely prefer this. I talked about this earlier. I think we need to give people multiple, I think we need to give people singular jobs so they can put all of their energy into that rather than somebody that does everything. That's it. Sadiq says, we need an experienced director of football. I don't think Gilberto Silva has that experience. Hitchhiker's Guide says, Tom, do you have anyone you feel would be a good replacement? I've talked before. I said Simon Rolfs at Bayer Leverkusen would be my pick personally, but it's very difficult, of course, to get him out of that role. Solomon says, can you talk a bit more about what kind of qualification and experience you need to be a successful sporting director? How much autonomy does the director have at a big club like Arsenal? I think, obviously, the person coming into the role will have less of an influence than Edu had. You've got to get your feet under the table. You've got to work out where you stand in relation to the manager. Arteta's own influence is probably going to somewhat grow in the vacuum that exists after Edu departs and the gap between a new person coming in as well. The experience, of course, comes from working with clubs at a scouting level, a recruitment level, in negotiations, in working with intermediaries and getting deals done. It also is about working with other people within your own group and, working harmoniously, delegation skills, being able to give jobs out to other people and to be able for them to dictate, of course, what you need to do. So all of these things I think are really important in that type of role. And I would want someone who's experienced in all of these things to be able to take over the position. My Rugel says Mark Overmars. Now, Mark Overmars, of course, has been out of a job since leaving Ajax, where he, of course, was he quit after sending, quote, inappropriate messages to female colleagues. It's a report I'm reading from Sky. Mark Overmars had been Ajax director of football for nearly 10 years and recently had his contract extended, but the former Arsenal, Barcelona and Ajax winger says he is ashamed after the club say he sent inappropriate messages to female colleagues over an extended period of time. That was in 8th of February 2022. I don't know if he's taken up any role since that point. Just having a quick look. If indeed he has taken up any role since then. On the 10th of January 2024, Overmars was banned for 1 year by FIFA from world football for his inappropriate behaviour. So currently he's serving a ban. An independent sports tribunal last year banned Overmars from any position in Dutch football, for 2 years over the incidents, with 1 year suspended. The KNVB then asked FIFA to turn the domestic suspension into a global one. We have a duty to report this sanction to FIFA's disciplinary committee, which has decided to take over the suspension as of the 16th of November 2023. So you aren't getting Overmars. Basically, he's serving a ban currently. So, I don't think that will be happening, nor do I think I want that to happen. Franyar says, Tom, let's be honest, only thing that matters is the person does the best job. I don't care if it's Harry Kane. If he is the best at the job, get them. I do care if there are certain aspects to their character that are questionable. You can be a great person at your job, but I still think, you need to take into account certain character traits as well, and whether they are a good fit for the club. That's also very much important too. Let's go to Andy, who says, morning, Tom. With Arteta being a young manager, do you think Edu's successor should be more senior in years? How about Patrick Vieira? Again, I'm not sure Patrick Vieira is the right guy. Has he ever been really a director of football for a club in that kind of level? I don't think so. Again, I want this to be someone, yes, who is senior and has got plenty of experience and has got a very good record of doing what they've done. But it doesn't have to be a former player. Lisa, someone with the same traits as David Dean would be ideal. The David Dean thing is always something that I think, I don't get the obsession. And the irony is, a lot of the time, the whole David Dean thing is a lot of younger people who don't really know too much about what went on those days, didn't really watch, weren't even footballingly conscious at that time, but just heard about the legendary David Dean and the work that he did with Arsene Wenger. It was a very different time in football then. Football has moved on. Football is a lot more data-driven these days, that uses technology that wasn't around then. And it's just a very different thing. Of course, there are characteristics of David Dean's success at Arsenal that you would want in a new sporting director. But there are also plenty of traits that have evolved since then that you would obviously have in somebody else to come in. David Dein, for what he did, is a legend at Arsenal Football Club, of course. And the work that was done to build a squad and to convince a legendary manager like Arsene Wenger to come in, was always going to be a brilliant, brilliant thing. But the idea that you'd bring David Dein back now is just not the same. It's just not the same at all. Jahio says the media hates Arsenal. They watch Arsenal every move. I mean, I'm the media. I don't hate Arsenal. Moss Cannon, says he tried to get Ashley Cole to stay, but they didn't want to pay him any more than that as well. Cannon also says not Wenger. FIFA has changed him, and he's now too old for that type of position. Paul says, wow, Streamline made me miss 24 minutes. Going to watch from the start, Tom, at the TGT Global community. Smash that like button. Thank you, Paul. Very much appreciate the kind support on the channel. Really, really do appreciate it. That's a funny suggestion in the chat there. NSW says, Tom, do you think this Edu news is the cause of the drop in form? No, I don't. I don't think it's anything to do with that. To be honest, I think that's completely separate. Of course, there's going to be players that are disappointed to see Edu leave because he was a big part of the conversations which led them to sign for Arsenal. But yeah, I from my perspective, I cannot foresee I can't foresee why there would be any reason for that as well. Yasin says, did you see Ornstein's comments on how the lack of personnel who challenges Arteta at the club? I mean, that is just a part and parcel of where we're at right now. Of course, Arteta has got a very strong grip on things. His ideas, his philosophy, his foresight at Arsenal is relatively unchallenged. Is that healthy? Probably not. We do need someone to come in who is going to work with Arteta, but also is going to challenge him, is going to question him. You don't want dictatorships. You just don't. And while he certainly is probably the most important individual at the club, he needs to understand, of course, as always, that the club is bigger than everyone else and every decision needs to be taken for the benefit of it. So, yeah, it's there's always going to be concerns that his power grows and that it becomes too similar to that of Arsene Wenger's reign. I sincerely hope that doesn't happen and that we bring in someone that is there to be not under Arteta, but on either a par or even slightly above Arteta in terms of the hierarchy within the team. King says, I would want someone who has no ties to Arsenal and is only employed based on their ability and experience. Damien says, do you think Arteta knew this was going to happen before he signed his new contract? Absolutely no idea, Damien. I have absolutely no idea. I don't think Arteta's decision to sign a new deal would have been predicated on whether or not Edu would stay, if that's any kind of answer to the question. But I'd be very surprised. I'd be very surprised if anyone knew the answer to that question. There's absolutely no way of knowing if he had any idea. These links to Edu and Forest's owners have been there for months and months and months, way longer back than Arteta signed that new deal. So it's not like it's been completely out of the blue. It's a surprise, but there has been smoke. And that fire that was clearly there and existed may have been unknown to Arteta and others. And I'd be very surprised if it wasn't to some degree known. But maybe still that this is... I don't think it had anything to do with Arteta signing a new deal. I don't think Arteta was requiring Edu to still be there to continue his work. I think that'd be a bit weird, wouldn't it? So yeah, I don't think so. Troy says, I want someone who is really serious about taking the club to the next level. I think, I don't know who on earth they would employ that wouldn't be very serious about taking Arsenal to the next level. Edu was very serious about taking Arsenal to the next level. And he did do that and has done that with the players that we've signed, of course, and the work that we've done to build this squad. So, yeah. RM says, bring in Ed Woodward. I can only take that. I hope is a joke. I sincerely hope it's a joke. Earl says, I think we may have been sacked because of the poor transfer. No, he resigned, Earl. This was not a decision taken by Arsenal. I can tell you that with, very, very strong knowledge of the fact that this was a decision taken by him. It wasn't a decision taken by Arsenal. So we can stop the gaslighting of trying to convince fans that someone else. Speaking of gaslighting, goodness me, I saw this tweet this morning. I don't know if you saw this. Someone tweeted yesterday saying Arsenal have spent £65 million on forwards since the start of 2020. Now, I thought they'd forgotten Kai Havertz because I thought that all they were doing was talking about Kai Havertz, who has been Arsenal's centre forward, of course, since midway through last season. Been a centre forward for Arsenal now longer than he has been playing any other position for Arsenal. And no, it turns out that they didn't include Kai Havertz in that, and they were just talking about Trossard and Jesus, which was a wrongly added up figure, of course, anyway, for those two players. Arsenal, of course, have also brought in Havertz to be a key figure in that forward line. Have we, or should we have signed more? Certainly arguably so. But it's amazing what people will make up, isn't it, to try and, gaslight people into thinking something. John says, I've just heard the news from Sky that Win the Dog has gone into the Marinakis group as well. So much for loyalty. I'm getting a gerbil. I've lost all faith in the world. Oh, I don't know about gerbils. Something about gerbils just doesn't sit right with me these days, especially in the Arsenal fan base. Hussein says, whoever he may be, I just hope his relationship with Arteta is good, and that'll be the most important thing. Dennis says, he was not sacked. He resigned. Christ, what is wrong with you people? People love a story, Dennis. People love making up stories. It's as simple as that. And Earl says, to be fair, if anyone offers you treble your wages, you will move. Again, I've kind of covered this. It's not always the case for everybody. It may be the case for yourself, Earl. It's not the case for me. It's not the case for others. If you enjoy what you do, if you're happier earning less money doing something, money is not the be-all and end-all. That's why when I quit my job to try and chase this job, I basically quartered my earnings. A third of my earnings, I think, at the time. I went and worked a minimum wage job for 6 days a week when I left teaching, and that was the only way that I could get a foot in the door of this business before then gradually working your way up, because I wanted to be happier, because I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. So no, it's not always the case that if you're offered treble the money that you're on now, you will leave, because it may be for a job that you're not happy doing. I know plenty of friends of mine that, talk constantly about the idea of moving to a different career because they're not happy what they're doing, even if it means earning less money. It depends on people. It depends on people. Elle says, my wife would divorce me if I didn't take a treble. Well, I'm not going to make any comments there, but I took a significant cut and mine stayed with me. So mine did stay with me. Abdul says, makes you wonder if Edu really did his best in the market over a summer, assuming that he already knew that he was planning to resign. I don't question if Edu and his understanding of where he was going with Arsenal and maybe taking another job would have changed the way in which you approach that window. I don't believe that was the case. I think that's quite the conspiracy theory, quite the accusation as well. Gary says, what if Saeed TV offers you 4 times the money? Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to. I've watched a few of his things come up on my timeline recently, and he's not a fan of his co-stars eating their dinner on stream, is he? I don't know. Someone comes between me and my food. Never going to be okay with that. Never going to be okay with that. Albert says, Dennis, I agree. It's ridiculously toxic and embarrassing, really. That's why I stay away from other places. The chat there is just too much. Talking about AFTV. I personally, as I've said before, I think AFTV's come a long way. Since the days it first had some of its characters on. I think it's better off with its changed group of panelists and people. I think it's kept a lot of its fantastic cast, like Lee, of course, is a good friend of ours here, and it's brought in some fantastic people like Graham. I say brought in Graham. Graham's been there an incredibly long time doing some good work. But people like James, I enjoy his content. Turkish, I don't always agree with what Turkish says, but I enjoy a lot of his discourse. I would Turkish be on the show, and obviously I'm happy to debate Turkish whenever. You're never going to enjoy every bit of content, and of course there's an element of the TV aspect of it, but I think it's come a long, long way, and there's a lot of effort that's gone into improving it, which some people are fine and just being like done with it, and they'll never, ever, ever, ever accept that it was improved or whatever. But AFTV says Alvin Mod says AFTV is fine for the most part, but the fan base in the chat box is horrible. That I'm not going to disagree with you with. You go places, you go to other channels, you go anywhere else really, and you you look in the chat box and it's It's horrible. Some of the comments that are left, and that's, I always say, and I'm happy to say this always. To quote our good friend James McNicholas, when you work in this space, there's a chance that you're always going to have to see these people. You're going to have to come into contact with them, and so if you ever say anything critical, you have to somewhat front up to that when you see them. And I have absolutely no problem in saying that some people don't look after their communities, like they just don't, and enable abusive, horrid comments to spew through a chat box, and we don't. I'm just not about that. I want it to be that if someone's got an opinion and they're putting it across in a respectful way, if someone else disagrees with that, they can disagree with it in a respectful way. So the chat boxes are a different kettle of fish entirely. Mimeno says can't control the chat. Unfortunately, the biggest fan channel is what it is. I think you can to an extent control it. I think when you've got the resources to control it, you absolutely can. You can do more of a job to control these things. So I wouldn't go as far as saying categorically it cannot be controlled. There cannot be any kind of recompense or consequence, because there can, if you're willing to put in the work to do that. But that's my only criticism. But at the same time, I'll go back to the original point. I personally think it's come a long way. I think it's changed and improved for the better. And I've always been a very staunch defender of that effort that's gone in to improving things there. So it's always worth it. BCA says, so you want to silence people? F off. This is the classic thing. People think freedom of speech is freedom from scrutiny, when it's not. It's not about silencing people. It's about being consequences for being horrible people. That's what it's about, BCA. That classic. We had it. What was it the other week? We were talking about some horrible things that are being left in Sophie's comment section, and someone came into the chat and was like, freedom of speech, don't infringe on my freedom of speech, please. I want to tell people they're this, that, and the other, and without any consequence. And it's like, you've listened to what I've said about this. I mean, BCS has given me an example of what's been said. I'll talk about this example I used last time. Someone in the chat box telling Sophie that our dearly beloved and recently passed Kevin Campbell would be disappointed in her for getting somebody onto the show that had a critical view of Mikel Arteta. That was one of the most toxic, disgusting comments that I've ever seen on a YouTube channel. And the thing about Sophie is that she takes ownership for a community and for a chat box, and that person, of course, was very quickly ejected, and quite rightly so. Actually, they weren't ejected immediately. They were given the opportunity to apologize and did, which is obviously another good thing about that. And if somebody is able to reflect on what they've said and written and think, no, that's not actually all right. I didn't put it across in the best way, or maybe I've not thought about or considered the ramifications of that comment. And to be fair, they apologize, but I don't blame anyone for not forgiving someone for saying something of such a horrible nature as well. So, and also, like, you see comments like if there happens to be a female presenter sometimes on certain shows, you'll see criticism just because of their gender. I don't know. So again, I reference Sophie. If Sophie turns up on other channels, I know Sophie tells me of the abuse that she can suffer just because she's a woman. And again, this kind of, sadly, there are people like BCA who think that people should be able to just say things like that and not face any consequences for it. It's a real shame, that places like that exist, but they do, and we're not that. So there you go. Abdul says the stuff people say. I know. It's a sad, horrible place out there, sadly. And but this is why I give props to AFTV at times when people just want to bash it, for taking the effort to make the actual program in itself and put the effort into have what it was before to not be that now. And that's I do always give it credit for that. and I will continue to do that as long as it continues to do it. And if you don't like something, don't watch it. That's what I always say to people. If you don't like watching something, if you don't like it, don't watch it. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your energy. And on that thread as well, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I think we've obviously tackled a lot of Arsenal-related questions today. And I know that some of you enjoy when we go off on these more social side tangents. I did a pretty critical review of the Newcastle game. A pretty damning. It was pretty negative. And do you know why it was pretty critical and damning and negative? It's because it was pretty negative. The performance was negative. The performance was horrid. The effort was unacceptable, unforgivable. And for that record, for that reality to have existed, of course, I'm not going to come onto the show on Sunday and act like everything is fine. And I tell you, I'll be honest with you, and I don't mind giving you these glimpses behind the curtain of the channel. I received several messages, people complaining that I was too negative, that they don't come to this channel to hear the criticisms of Arsenal or Arteta or the team. And I'm sorry, but if that's why you come here, then you're coming here for the wrong reason. I'm not here as a fan of Arteta or a fan of individual players, and it's not my job to defend their actions. I'm a fan of Arsenal Football Club, and if my team puts in next to no effort and the performance is awful, I'm going to call that out and I'm going to criticize it. So I'm sorry to disappoint those that think that this is kind of a Arteta out, Arteta in space, and that it's going to be, if you think that this is an Arteta in channel, you're coming for that, then go somewhere else, because that's not what this is about. This is about, if Arsenal play bad, we criticize it. We say it as it is. And that's what's important, So I'm sorry. It's frustrating when you get messages from people saying, I can't believe you were so critical. I don't come here to watch your stuff for being critical. I come here to listen to it so you can provide, what Arteta does well. It's not about that. That's toxic positivity. That's something I never, ever, ever really want to fall into the trap of, is toxic positivity, because it has. And I have done in the past. I own that. I own the fact that in the past, I've definitely fallen into the trap of thinking, I remember it was around the time where Arteta first took over. I remember a really poor season, the first full season he had. I definitely fell into that trap of trying to just look for the positives. You grow and you learn and you improve, and, don't do that. It's horrible. And if that's what you come here for, then I'm sorry you're going to be disappointed, because when Arsenal don't do well, we're going to say as it is, we're going to criticize it, and, go find your toxic positivity somewhere else, is what I'd say. Ferret says, did you see what happens to Flex on the United view that was mad and ridiculous, Tom? In 2024, to go up to someone and say the N-word was mind-boggling. Yes, I did. And I'm actually a little bit frustrated in myself that I didn't talk about this on Monday's show. Of course, the hysteria of the Edu story kind of overshadowed everything, and it shouldn't have done. And I'm actually very self-critical that I didn't talk about this sooner, because I was going to. So thank you, Fuad, for bringing it up now and jogging my memory. Because I watched it again this morning, and I watched Flex's response. Now, I've only ever had one interaction with Flex, and that was when I played against him at the Emirates Stadium on one of the media days there. And, I can only speak very highly of Flex and the content he produces and how he produces content and how he speaks on certain platforms like Sky and others. I think Flex has done a great job in building what he's built and getting to the level that he is. And I think he's an inspiration as well to plenty of others. But when I watched that back and I watched that video, certainly some of again, that belief and joy that we have in football, part of that died watching that video. To see in 2024 such a blatant example of racism, completely out the blue. And so I think it was the unprovoked nature of it that shocked me so much. And that's, by the way, that's certainly not to say that when it's provoked, it makes it okay. It's not, but it was just the essence of how spontaneous it was that really, really got me and really did shock me in that moment, that the person that committed that horrendous act not only knew they were on camera, or I assume they must have known they were on camera because it's, the camera was there. Flex got a microphone in his hand. If you don't know what I'm talking about, by the way, you can of course go and it's not going to be difficult to find if you just type in Flex on social media. I think it will come up. But effectively, Flex is like recording a video outside the Old Trafford, and this woman comes past and just uses the N-word at Flex in a very horrible way. And it was just one of the most blatant examples of spontaneous racism I've ever seen. And we've been doing podcasting for 8 years, and we've experienced and seen some pretty horrible things, and talked about some pretty horrible topics. We've talked about Arsenal's players being racially abused. We talk about fans being racially abused. But this, I've never seen such a horrendous, spontaneous, racist act. I think since I've started, really covering Arsenal in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, certainly, I don't have any real dealings with Flex at all, but he's got all of mine, and I'm sure plenty of your support. And if you're in any way you're able to help, which I doubt it, because of course being an Arsenal channel, it's I doubt there's going to be much help in identifying the person involved in that. But I sincerely hope that person is found to bring about the consequences that absolutely they should face for their actions. And I sincerely hope that they are found, and I sincerely hope that they are punished for what they have done and said. And I think Flex produced a very brave video the next morning talking about it in a lot more detail as well. So yes, hope that you all go and give that a watch, because I think it's definitely inspiring. And it's definitely educational, and it brings again to light the reason why, when we go back to this conversation about free speech, everyone has free speech. That woman had free speech to say what she said, but that doesn't mean that she shouldn't face consequences for what she has said, because what she has said is horrible. And this is what we mean when we talk about the fight against abuse, the fight against discrimination of any kind, and that's what's important. Front Yard says, Tom, as a black person in our community, we do talk about how certain clubs are really good places for people to of course being Arsenal and Man United. So it's really shocking to see it happen at Old Trafford. Of course, that there are clubs that have reputations and have had we've seen incidents on a more frequent scale, and it's you are right. Man United and Arsenal have had a fantastic relationship in the promotion of of the black community, and with welcoming in not just black fans, but of course black players as well. So to see it at and we've heard about it at Arsenal as well. It's not just Man United, and we're not, it's not like the Arsenal fan base has not had individuals as well that have not been guilty of it, because there are. And so for that reason, it's yes, it's perhaps in some ways more shocking when it happens. I think perhaps closer to home with a club like Arsenal, but also with clubs like Manchester United and Arsenal, because there is such a relationship and a history of those clubs being so promoting of diversity and change and support and anti-discrimination and all of those things. So yeah, it's why we talk about it. And it's why I get so uppity when you see people in chat boxes come and say, stop trying to infringe on people's free speech. Why can't people say what they want? And you can say what you want, but you absolutely should face the consequences for what you said. And hopefully that will encourage you in the future to learn and to not say those things, even though you have the freedom to do so. And Natty says that what happened to Flex is a quite normal day-to-day thing that people of colour face on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that it isn't, Natty. I absolutely understand that it is. I hear it from people all the time. Friends of mine, colleagues of mine, that experience things that I will never, I have never, and I never expect to experience. And I'm in a privileged position because I was born a white man, and that comes with privilege, just through the systemic evolution of our society. But I also feel compelled, as always, to talk about it and to never shy away from these topics and to continue to raise awareness around it. And that's obviously always very, very important. Freddie says, have you seen the picture of Arteta's face that's been morphed into Tony Pulis? It made me laugh out loud. As much as it is a reductionist view, it was funny. I think I did see it. And I'll be honest, I definitely did chuckle. I think the idea that Arteta is being compared to managers like Pulis and now obviously more so Mourinho is definitely it's definitely hilarious and without question laughable and easily torn apart with any kind of scrutiny. And I think it's getting to a ridiculous level, isn't it? It's really getting to a very, very ridiculous level indeed. And says, I have actually had someone comment to me, do you have any white people play at Arsenal? And I was happy to shut them down. Yes, again, what a ridiculous question to even ask you, Ant, as well. Hussein says, on a separate note, have we outgrown Martinelli? He seems to be exactly the same player as he was a few years ago. Compare that to Saka. I think it's probably fair to say, sorry, it's fair to say that maybe a few years ago is a little harsh. I think his best season at the club was obviously the 22-23 season. He scored a ridiculous number of goals, and he hasn't been able to match those levels again since that, and that's been a real shame. And that's on Arteta again, and Martinelli himself, of course, as always, to try and find that, to try and unlock that. So yeah, that's very, very important, I think, to point out. Darius is on another note. Tom, I just want to say thank you for the show yesterday morning. I really enjoyed it, hearing the different opinions on the same situation, even though I didn't agree with some. It was very enjoyable. But that's what it's about, It's about different opinions coming on. And there were times, some of them were a struggle, for me. And I think you saw that in the way in which I questioned and argued those points. But I want those discussions. I want people to come on and give those views, because it's important, I think, for people that also share them to then see the challenge, to see the scrutiny of those views, to see why those views don't stack up to that scrutiny. The idea that I think one of our callers said that he's been half decent. One of our callers said that he hasn't done a good job, and I feel like I put across a significant argument, to suggest that that's not the case. And I think there's recency bias that's affecting the view. It wasn't perfect, at no point has Edu's job been perfect. There's been mistakes. It could have been better, but it's still been very good. And he's left the club in a much better place than when it was when he first joined, in a recruiting standpoint, in a squad building standpoint, in a contractual and sales standpoint. By the end, he sold players at the end of his time with Arsenal have a very good standard. 30 million for Nketiah, 25 million for Ramsdale, and 30 plus million for Smith Rowe. Like, we got good money for those players. Balogun, another one. Xhaka, I know he's gone on to do great things, but at the time, I still thought it was a good fee that we got, considering we only had so little time left on the channel as well. Jesus in the chat says, I am black, and so always see people calling Arsenal Black Arsenal, but some fans I know, we support Arsenal because of the connection and the welcome to our colour. And I know that has been an inspiration for a lot of people to follow Arsenal because of the presence of so many black players early on in the time with Arsenal as well. And recently there was a fantastic event that Arsenal held called Black Arsenal that did really, really well. If Clive's still listening in the chat, I know that he attended that. And I've spoken to people that attended it, and it sounded like it was a brilliant event. A really, really brilliant event. Let's go to SJ says, I've had reverse racism, but it's never mentioned. My employees didn't know what. SJ, please feel free to send me any of the evidence for that. And I would love to read it. So yeah, send me some evidence of that on social media. That'd be great. All of my handles are. So feel free to send that across, because I would love to read about it. Manali says Edu grew with the club. Only really contentious thing was the timing of his departure as well. I agree with that. Mikey says Arsenal as a club will never get a fair shake from the media, rivals, and self-haters from within our own fan base. And for that reason, I'm calm in this discourse around the issues that we have worked through. Earl says, Tom, do you think that we are in danger of this team falling apart if we don't get out of this form? We need a Gyökeres to give the team and the fans a lift because I haven't felt like this since 2018. And that's a privileged thing to not feel this way since 2018. That's 6 years of Arsenal moving in a very positive direction. So I look forward to seeing if we can get out of it. And I think we are in a dip, I sincerely do. And I hope that we can drag ourselves out of it. And I think we've got a great run of games coming up that hopefully will allow us to do that. But if we play like we did against Newcastle, again, I don't have much confidence that we'll win any games because we cannot perform like we did on that Saturday lunchtime. We cannot perform like that ever again. We may, but we need to make it our absolute mission to never, ever see a performance quite like that ever again. Alamon says, there's no such thing as reverse racism. Racism is racism. I would have to agree with you there. There is no such thing as reverse racism. It can't. It's its own definition. There's no such thing whatsoever. John says, the day we stop using colour to describe someone is the day this stops. It takes people on their character and actions rather than their colour and their sexual preferences. Hashtag Morgan Freeman. And it is very true. I wish there was sometimes better ways of having these conversations because, I'm sitting here talking about the abuse suffered by a black man, and I'm using, and we're talking about the color of that person's skin in a descriptionary way. Descriptive, that's the word. In a descriptive way. And you're right, the day that we no longer have to have these discussions is going to be a great day. I fear that day will never come. Because sadly, there's too many there's too many horrible people that have no intention of ever helping us get to that day. But hopefully the little by little we can make it a little bit better. And that's what we can do. It's been a very deep chat today. I'm surprised my voice has held out as long as it has. I'm glad that it has. I think we've covered some very important topics. And I'm really glad that we talked about the incident involving Flex as well, because it was something I wanted to do yesterday, but obviously didn't get a chance to because of the huge news that dropped. So I'm thankful to Fuad for bringing that up as well. Thank you for listening. Do drop a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. Let us know in the comments anything that you've thought about today's episode. And of course, I'd love to hear like a full discussion about it. So yeah, always open to hearing those views. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.